welcome guys to Industrial Marketing Live. Appreciate you guys so much coming on and being part of this with us again. So really exciting topic I have today is on newsletters and basically how to create an industrial newsletter that doesn't resemble your trade magazine or what the 800-pound gorilla in your space is doing to ultimately just pump product all the time. And so when I was thinking about people I wanted to just bring on to talk about this, I thought about, well, maybe Joe could talk about it for Gorilla 76. Maybe I could do my own research and just do it. But then it dawned on me like instantly that I had an amazing resource to do this Industrial Marketing Live, and that is none other than Ashley Gattuso, who is my who's my fellow marauder on Demand Gen Live, but she's also the director of marketing for Simple Focus, which is a company that specializes in helping B2B brands, specifically in SaaS, but regardless, B2B brands curate their own newsletter that actually, is creative and works. So I just thought that Ashley would be the perfect person to bring on to talk about newsletters, because Ashley, how many people have you helped launch the newsletter, both at Simple Focus and then before that?
Oh, I don't know, because I'm quite old, you see.
Okay.
So, so I think you could say that Curated has had thousands of newsletters. So Curated is this software that we're talking about, that Simple Focus software. It's one of our brands. So that's under my territory or reign or whatever. But then my background is in journalism, magazine journalism specifically. So I'm about to date myself, but when I was in grad school for journalism, our professors were like, hey, there's this new thing called blogs. And we think all journalists should probably start blogs so we can learn about self-publishing. And however many years later, here we are with the next resurgence in newsletters, which started out as a way to get your blog in front of someone, right? Like you'd write all these articles and then you'd need a way, if they weren't using the RSS feed attached to your blog, to send it. So over the years, across magazines and working for different clients, I would assume hundreds that I have specifically influenced or touched, and then within Curated more than that, because I have like a newsletter creator series and a newsletter that we put out as a brand, and I'm like all over social trying to help people with their newsletters. Mm-hmm.
It's all you right now. That's your wife. Actually, also former reality TV star. Ask her that separately. Gotcha.
Yeah, there was no newsletter about that.
No, there wasn't. Maybe in time there will be, though.
It wasn't worth a newsletter.
May have been. Anyway, so we're going to talk about newsletters. So a little bit different today than normal. So like usually we have like a slide deck and we go through the slide deck and we talk through the slide. Not today. Today I'm going to do something different. Ashley has taken the time to build a presentation out on this tool called Notion, which is basically just going to be a live web page. And so it's a little more interactive than usual. And so with that, I'm going to just have Ashley, introduce herself in her words so I don't butcher them. And then B, just get started. And Ashley's just going to run through this and I'm going to ask questions. And if you guys have questions, I want them in the chat. And I know our last Industrial Marketing Live went a while. This one will not. Ashley's promised me. So so with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Ashley, and just let you do your thing. So floor is yours.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Ashley Gattuso of Simple Focus Software. I'm the director of marketing there. We have a tool called Curated, which is essentially a link collecting and email sending. So it helps you build a newsletter and send it. If you are sending out a curated newsletter, it also supports writing your own content and sending that out. And I'm delighted to have been asked by Matthew to come and help Gorilla 76 kind of give industrial marketers a sense of how they could shift their mindset around newsletters and ultimately do what it is that we want newsletters to do, which is create intimacy, build brand trust, do all of those things that we want our content to do, but in email form. So before we even dive in, do you want me to give more like educational proof that I'm like,
no, I think you did it there. No, you did it. Go for it.
I've been editing newspapers since 1996 in my high school newspaper. Okay. for which we cut out stuff out of WordPerfect and sent to the local newspaper.
I even remember WordPerfect. Now I'm aging.
Yeah, we would cut out columns and take them to the newspaper to print. Yeah, so I've done industrial stuff. Matt's going to kind of chime in, and what we've tried to do is build this out so that it suits this particular audience, but really it can be expanded, and I will be duplicating this and making it more for like general marketing too, but there are a lot of things that overlap, so we're just starting here. So why even send an email newsletter? The point of a newsletter is to deepen the relationship you have with your consumer. It's not to sell them something. It's not to remind them about your company party that you just had. It is to deepen that relationship. Maybe reminding them of the company party you just had would do that, but it's not been known to make anyone feel like they're closer to a brand because they heard they had a Christmas party. So you need to define or redefine your newsletter goals. And I'm going to pause here. This is a Notion page. I don't know if anyone uses Notion. You don't have to use it to come and view this page. So Matt's going to include this link with the webinar recording so that you can come through here if you want to revisit this information.
Yep.
So when you're sending a newsletter, is it to attract and nurture prospects, or just to nurture customers, or both? A lot of people tend to do one newsletter that does all of that. I've worked for some companies that have a customer-facing newsletter and a prospect-facing newsletter because they want to slightly tweak that content to better serve either of those segments of your audience. I think it's a better goal to start with one and just serve than to give yourself the headache of like, what are we going to make different? Why would we measure that differently? But in some cases, it makes complete sense. So here's my big thing, is that successful marketing newsletters serve an audience by being helpful, and newsletters that fail are about the companies, not the people receiving them. So I feel like you're on the edge of a question.
I feel like, the question about sending 2 versions of newsletters, I'm really interested in. First off, if anyone here, if you have a newsletter, can you just put like a 1 in the chat? And if you send a like prospect and customer newsletter, put like a 2, because like I'm curious to see if anyone's actually trying to do 2 different variations of a newsletter. I mean, I think my fear with that ultimately is that you double your workload when you do that. And the content you're sending, unless you're going to send a bunch of how-to sort of resources and content for like product success, I don't really see kind of the point of sending 2 different newsletters. So you're just going to end up doubling your workload. You're going to dilute your content invariably as well. And then also ultimately, like if you're trying to do two of them, like you're doubling your frequency and your workload, and probably also cutting your success of each of them in half at least. Like to me, I would say to focus on 1 is probably the best goal for you, especially if you're getting started. Susan, you run 2. Okay, that's awesome. Kudos to you for that, because it feels like
I've seen somewhat justifiable reasons. Like if you have HubSpot and you can do smart content and you can say, I want customers to see this and I want prospects to see this, or if someone's in a particular part of their buying journey and you really want to hit them with an article that you know you want them to see at that moment. But that to me is wedging a nurture sequence into a newsletter. And so it's a complex approach. If you can, I like to focus on doing something simple really well before getting complicated. So if you're game for that and able to do that, great. So I included here, I haven't met Joe personally, but I've met him on LinkedIn. And Joe, if I'm right, is the founder or one of the founders of your company, correct?
Yeah.
And so we kind of clicked, and I actually included something he wrote on a LinkedIn post in one of my newsletters, because I have a newsletter about newsletters. Is that meta enough for everybody? And what I think he wrote actually really captures this idea that we want to have a mindset shift. And this is going to sound a lot like when people started blogging. for brand awareness or for getting discovered through SEO. And that is that you need to operate like an editorial niche media group who is putting out content for a specific audience. People who run magazines, they know what their audience, how often they go out to eat during the week. They know what kind of purses they buy or what kind of brand of shoe they prefer to wear. So they go into heavy research to know exactly what their audience is so that they can then produce a product that audience loves so much that sponsors will then buy to have space in front of that particular audience. You already have the space in front of that audience if they've subscribed to you to get brand recognition. Now what you need to do is serve them. So it's a mindset shift from telling them what you're selling and trying to speed them through buying something else to balancing that out, because you are probably sending promotional emails about deals or new products or things along those lines. The editorial style newsletter that marketers send is actually a way to counterbalance that promotional email, that e-blast that you sent because you just released a new something, and give them something that they look forward to. So I kind of think about it, because I'm a mom, of when you feed a baby. And do you remember how you would like feed something sweet and then sneak in the peas, like one bite after the other? And so not to say that all promotional stuff is the peas, but like be the applesauce, right? Like be the thing that they look forward to receiving. That is why they don't go and unsubscribe from everything you send. And you're keeping yourself top of mind and offering information that they can really use in their day-to-day to improve their business. So Joe says it well. You can come back and find it here, but he proposes reinventing your company newsletter as the digital delivery vehicle for targeted insights and resources that help them, not you. So your question with every bit of content that you put in your newsletter is, does this serve them? And so I created a before you send checklist that I am going to go through right now, but I also want guys like y'all can come back and snag this and copy it and paste it into wherever you need it. But I'd love for you to be using this before every newsletter send. And the questions are, does this newsletter deepen your relationship? Does it serve as a quality touch point? Now, this is like making me laugh because it's reminding me of a conversation we had the other day. It's would you read it and smile? Like, as the judge of your own content, would you read this as the persona you're sending it to and smile, or be like, it's all useless, I can't use this? Does it remind the reader that your company cares about their success? Does it provide resources that support that success? Does it feel like it was sent by a human? Everybody's like riffing on bots these days. Don't let your newsletter be the bot in their email. You know, like that's automated junk that you think might spin them in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. And then does it deliver quality content that earns you the right to be promotional? So I like to think of all the service that you're doing a customer before they buy or after they buy, as that's the free stuff. That's the free service that then earns you the right for their dollars to be spent with you.
That's such a good point. The last part, I always think of this like Josh Braun's deposit and withdrawals, right? And so every time you send a newsletter, that's a value where you're sending content curated from a bunch of different sources. And I want to talk about that more because I'm excited to actually touch on that. But like, you're constantly putting deposits into your prospect's account. So when you do make that promotional email, it's not so gratuitous that they're just repulsed by it. It's like, these guys actually have been helping me out. So even if it doesn't hit, if it's not quite the right time, if they're not in that buying stage, they're at least not going to reject it altogether. You'll get the benefit of the doubt more because you've built that trust and that equity. So I do feel that last part is super key. In regards to that, and also sent by a human, what that really means is just also written by a human. Like don't overlook how you write your newsletter copy. because it has such a tendency to be super dry, because you want to either be lazy and use the meta description on the article that you choose, or like not give it any kind of context. Or if you're going to curate, you're not even going to take the time to read the content before you actually share it with them. You just find the headline and the byline.
Oh yes, the
Careful
lazy
about that one,
curator.
right?
Don't
So
be the lazy curator.
yeah, so screen that content for yourself. If it's a podcast, listen to it at 2x or something like that. But like, take the time to make sure that that content is good all on itself. And then, you get to be the one to frame it up in your newsletter to tell your audience why it's interesting to them.
Exactly. Okay, so now we're going to get into our list. We have 9 things. Matt asked me for a do's and don'ts list. So I got like really granular, and he sent me some examples, and I found some others. So we're going to go through some don'ts. Like I'll show you the don't and then the do, and then we will move into like a Q&A. So this is intended to be revisited. It's kind of like a fun blog reading experience almost. But the first one is don't make it all about your company. Do serve your target audience. So I think I already have this one open. So the one on the left, you guys, did you see this one? It's really hard to see on this screen, but there's a link on there. This is at a glance. I didn't read every word of this, but I saw enough logos to convince me that this is all about this company, right? Like everything looks as if it's asking me to buy something. And then this gets really interesting because it's a year in review, and it's about things they did. And so I used to work for Ministry Brands, which is a SaaS a SaaS software, a church software portfolio. And they had one brand that did church websites. And what we did instead, because the year in review, like that's a popular thing to do. Like, what are we going to write about in December? Let's do the year in review. Yeah. Or in January sometimes. And we came up with this nice way of having a year in review, but having it be about the customer. So we did like 12 things you did this last year. And we used their websites and the like amazing, it was ministry. So it was a perfect, like, look at how they did this with their outreach program or whatever. They were using the product to support the thing they did, which is exactly what you do when you use StoryBrand, right? Is you say, how do I fit into your story?
Yeah. How do I make you the hero, right? How do I make a customer the hero all the time?
Exactly. So they were the heroes. We were the guide that got them there because they had our tool set and they were able to achieve it. But it rings so much more powerful than just like a call out of things you were able to do. I'm going to show, this is not an industrial newsletter, but this is Mobile Growth News, which is powered by Branch. And their customer base is concerned about mobile. This does not have any images, but it does not matter. The people who read it aren't reading it for the images. They want to know what's going on, and he sends this weekly, in the world of mobile and how that's going to impact their business. So he curates stories. None of these are about his brand. But he curates stories, brings them together, gives them, it does have a picture, gives them lots of ways that they can improve their business. Like, these are things they care about, they should care about. And then sneaks in, like, we've got an upcoming podcast and here are some events. It's subtle. It's not overkill. It's not 100% brand. It's like 5% brand after they've earned the right to promote something.
It's also really easy to navigate, which I liked about it a lot too. Mm-hmm. When you scroll down, like, you have the like reverse color text, plus like the text link color is all the same. So when you're jumping from one subject matter to another. And I think when you're thinking about where most people are going to be getting your newsletter, which is going to be on mobile, on their phone, having that sort of visual marker to know when they're moving from one section of your newsletter to another, if you have it broken out like that, if you have it broken out by maybe like a product group that you want to cover, where you want to curate news within that like certain group. So like if it's in welding and you want to cover, health and safety or fume extraction or like, automotive or whatever it is, give yourself that ability to like really neatly break that content out. Because if you're sending it to your whole subscriber base, they're not going to, and you're only sending one newsletter, not every section is going to be relevant to everyone. So you get to jump right to the part that's relevant to you, and then quickly get on it. And like, because you have those visual cues on the scroll, really easy to just thumb it up and just get there.
Yeah. And something that I will add to that is that think about being the editor of a newsletter the same way you would the editor of a blog, and know that it's easier to navigate when it has categories.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have metrics that tell you which categories are performing well, especially if those categories are for some of your sub segments, like your micro personas within your larger persona, then you can start to see how they're engaging like with that content. So I'm not going to read through all of these. You guys can come back, but essentially all brand is egotistical and it's not interesting to people. And 95% or 100% reader focus is demonstrating an understanding of what your audience cares about and showing them that you want to help them. So you're training them to expect emails that they want to read, which is why then your promotional emails will perform better, because you have excited them about being in relationship with you. All right, next we have don't make it hard to understand priority content or to read. Do make it easy to skim and find the most interesting content. So this is basically what Matt was just talking about just now. So we have our hard to read example, which I'll kind of scroll down. This one did not have a web view. So let me see here. Okay. So kind of an older template. Here's where it gets scary. I have grandma eyes. I've had contacts since the 3rd grade, but I can't make that out, nor should anyone want to make me have to. And I don't know how this looks on mobile. I didn't even look at it on mobile. Here's some curated links, but they're buried down far enough that like I'm not sure if the way they're displayed is going to get the attention you want them to get. So not as heavy on brand, but just a bit of a confusing layout and content. Like nothing in here particularly excites me, except maybe the cow.
Yeah, the cow.
Okay, so everybody.
That would have been a great banner image. Like, can I just start that off as the top?
Yeah. Okay, everybody, close your eyes while I'm scrolling up at a rapid rate. I don't want anyone to have like problems after.
I mean, just like think about how long you have to get your audience's attention with your email newsletter. Like, you get a second. Like, the most interesting image you have on your newsletter, like, you better put it all the way up top and kind of let everything else trickle down from that.
So then I found an alternative this is the iPad view of this, that was another dairy related bit. And this is a little fuzzy, but this is like, wow, that's much easier to digest, right? Mm-hmm. And then another that I follow, which this one is super long, so I'm not going to scroll the whole one, but you see an idea of this guy writes an intro that he calls the juicy bits. I tried to stay in the food dairy-ish theme here. And then he's got a style where he's got a header with a picture, a story, his take on that story, and then more in that category. And then he just repeats that throughout with maybe a meet in Memphis ad that I find particularly exciting.
Sure.
Like it's a barbecue event, meet up in Memphis. So the reasons for this should be pretty straightforward. Not making it easy to understand what the priority content is means people aren't going to find that priority content. And if they don't make it to the end, they'll miss something valuable that you might have there. And it feels like it's just asking a lot of the reader's time. So we go back to StoryBrand, which if you haven't, like, even subscribe to Donald Miller's Business Made Simple. It's worth it for like the daily videos. But there's this idea, this concept of calories and how many calories we ask someone to burn in reading or digesting our content. And the easier it is to digest and understand the point you're making, the better for you, because that's where you build in clarity and you show them that you respect their time. So moving along, unless you have a question. No. Yes.
I do. No, I do. I have a question for Sam, which is one I already had written down, but this is the time to bring it up as soon as I get this question.
Sure.
All right. So the balance of volume and frequency for a newsletter always been a challenge. Balance and frequency. So in your opinion, where's the sweet spot? And you can't say it depends. Well, you can, but then you have to give some more context behind it.
I think the sweet spot is probably weekly if you can do it, and fortnightly, which is every 2 weeks, if you can't. And the reason I say that is because monthly, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to establish that rhythm with people. If that's your right cadence to start because of your bandwidth on your team, it's better to do it than not. But we're about to talk about supplementing your content with curated content, which actually enables more people to go fortnightly or weekly. It's kind of like if you're sending once a month, it's really easy to forget your company, but you want to make sure that you are putting yourself in the seat of your customer and saying, like, how many emails are they getting from us in the span of a month? Because if it's 15 promotional emails, even your 4 newsletters are not going to resonate because you're overdoing it.
Should you also be balancing your email nurture stuff as well? Is that another consideration to make? Like, let's say you have email nurture on content downloads, not something I recommend, but companies have it. Like, are you balancing that stuff as well with your frequency?
I think you should. I think you decide which of these is more valuable. And you and I have talked before about how interesting it would be to run a test and have one segment of your audience who downloads an ebook just put into a newsletter.
Yeah.
And one segment put into a nurture sequence, because nurture sequences are intended to sell. I mean, they're intended to give deposits, but their ultimate goal is to move someone to the status of MQL. Like, how many of these can I get them to open before I can sick sales on them? I mean, like that's the bad end of nurture sequences, right? So I'm losing you.
I'm sorry. I mean, look at the conversion rate of that all the way down, right? So like your lead nurture will probably convert at an extremely low percentage. And I would bet if you gave it like enough ramp time with your sales cycle that the newsletter nurture would probably do better. But I'm just pontificating on that, but
I'd be curious. I mean, like, it all depends also on how good your nurture is, right? But I am, as an individual who is a consumer, more drawn to a company that is willing to send me frequent, helpful advice that is timely. And that is the advantage of a newsletter, is that you are reacting to the news of the time. So you haven't set up an evergreen, something that should be applicable at this phase of the journey. Because what if I'm like 4 more steps ahead in the journey? And, so I think it'd be an interesting experiment. But I always opt for newsletter over nurture when given the choice.
All right. This is an important topic here, curating. So I want you to get into it, and then I got some questions for you about curating content.
Sure. So when I say too much brand content right here for Siemens,
multi-billion dollar company. And this is their newsletter they give me every month.
Okay. So this is a monthly, you're right? Like, you figured out it was monthly? Okay.
Yeah, it's monthly.
So very professional looking. I mean, visually, this is the best we've seen so far, right? Like, on the industrial side. Kind of a nice, we wish you well. Could have been more personal, but at least you're Mr. right here. Very formal. And then each of these leads to a blog that they have posted. So what happens is if you don't have the bandwidth to publish a blog once a week, if you're a monthly newsletter, or multiple blogs a week, if you want to do a weekly newsletter, then you're like a little high and dry with content. And you've put, if you're doing it for the purpose of being able to distribute it, which I will not argue, like SEO is a good intentioned marketing tactic, but it takes a long time to play out. So yes, it's great to get these articles to your readers as quickly as you can. But if you're not producing that much, there's no reason that you can't curate a newsletter and have 1 or 2 pieces of original content, and then the rest is curated content that helps your reader. Because if you think about it, should your team's bandwidth or ability to produce helpful content be the thing, or inability to do that, be the thing that holds you back from sharing good advice with your
for most people, that is exactly what holds them back, though, isn't it?
But it shouldn't be. Because if there is an article in the New York Times or in the, I don't know, Air Conditioners Weekly that is helpful to them, like, why not amplify that and be a connector? That is what a curator does, is says, hey, there's a lot of content out there. I'm going to find the very best stuff that I know that a person who is interested and has the same worldview and mindset that my audience does, and that my company's point of view aligns with. Like, why would I not help them to this news faster?
Right.
Because I need to go rewrite it and get SEO credit for it, or I need to like test if it's going to work. Curation is a great way to test, because you didn't have to write it. You just gave them a reason to look at it. And if no one's clicking that category over and over, you're like, oh, they don't care about that category. At least we didn't write it.
So I have a quick question for you on content curation, because I think some people here know this really well, some people not quite as much. How do you go about curating content? Like, what are some tools that you recommend? What are some things that you do to help curate content for your newsletter, if that's the way you're going to go? Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to close these out. I will say that this Pulse newsletter, this is the only branded piece of content in here. And it's a snippet about a video they recorded, right? Mm-hmm. Everything else is curated links. And so I feel like I popped it in here. A tip for curating content: sign up for newsletters that you want to be like, editorial newsletters, brand newsletters. Like, sign up for things that are distributing information. Like, if you know there's a website that covers a particular topic that your consumer is interested in, go and sign up for their RSS read, or their newsletter that basically sends their most recent stories out. You can also use something called Google Alerts. Does everybody know what Google Alerts are? They are these fantastic things that Google lets you set up, and you choose, like, you just go to alerts.google.com and you say, like, I want to follow these keywords. So naturally, I want to follow curation. I want to follow journalism. I want to follow publishing. I want to follow newsletter, because those are topics that my people are interested in. And so you can set it up so that each keyword delivers like daily, week, like you can decide the cadence of how often you want to receive these alerts, and they can come in one digest email all together, or they can come per keyword separately. But then you're going to have to muddle through the junk, right? Because there's a lot of junk on the internet. It'll be the same way if you used a paid feed, like Feedly.
Feedly, yeah, I was going to say that.
Which is a wonderful product. So you can use Feedly. I will say that Feedly, you can get your Google alerts pumped into there, but that's not the free account. That's a paid account. Like the second you want to use Google alerts, they make you use the paid account. There's also Pocket, which I don't think I have it on my Chrome, but I have it like maybe on Safari. But there's like an extension. So you see an article you like, you can put it in your Pocket. And then to minimize this, because I'm not here to brag about Curated, but we do have a little Chrome extension that would allow me to take whatever this URL is and pump it into a list of collected items that are waiting to go into my newsletter.
I'd say some other things you could do to curate content really quick.
Yes, please.
Find if there's a YouTube channel in your space, does stuff really good, subscribe to it. So you can get notified when they have good stuff, and you can use it for that week if they have it, or go back however many weeks you want to. Another suggestion is go look for podcasts within your industry that also do things within your space that you find interesting. Even things like around that space, subscribe to those, and feel free to curate those and also to send them. Even offer to reach out to those people and say, hey, I want to feature you on our newsletter like semi-regularly, and I'm wondering if you would be willing. I would use that as an intro opportunity to do some co-marketing or some co-content creation with those people. Whether that's like having them on a webinar like this, or something of that nature. So use your distribution for your newsletter to help leverage yourself for other marketing opportunities with your content overall. That's
a great idea.
I think is a really, really smart play.
Mm-hmm. And so basically, this is I even tell teams that aren't pumping out an external newsletter that activity, that behavior of trying to follow the news you think your consumer would be interested in is a great internal newsletter challenge, just because it gives you more in the headspace, right, of who you're selling to, which is always a good thing. I will add to that that you can curate Twitter posts. You can curate LinkedIn posts. You can get quite creative. So there's like on the fly things that are not time blocked that you just see and that'd be great for my audience. And then there's intentional, I am subscribed to these things because I know I need to be following these topics for my audience.
Another thing, you also for your newsletter, if you're doing any form of PR with your leadership, like getting your CEO on a podcast or your VP of sales on a podcast or on a panel discussion or anything like that, that's a pretty good like non-promotional way to get your subject matter expertise a little bit more legitimacy with your newsletter, because you basically kind of break it out a little bit. There's like this degree of separation that I think has some good effect essentially.
Yes.
Susan has a question, and I'm going to relay it over to you here. Okay. How much time do you allocate for each newsletter? I'm guessing you mean in man hours, Susan, or woman hours, people hours? So like how many hours? So how many hours do you allocate for a newsletter?
I would say that you're going to want to estimate for between 5 and 10.
Okay.
I average around 8.
All right.
If you have a team supporting that might mean 2 to 3 hours per team member. If you're all curating from different sources and responsible for different categories within the newsletter. So you can divide that up however that works best for your team.
Cool. Thank you, Susan.
Okay. So getting to the CEO of it all.
So now you're going to shoot it down.
Yeah. No, I'm not shooting it down. I think a CEO who writes an intro is wonderful if they're willing to do it in a less formal way. We're not going to get every CEO to be like, yo, what's up? It's the weekly newsletter. But this is an example of a newsletter. This is the header. Let's see if I can. All right. This is one I'm not excited about because now I've got to consider whether I want to read these people's CVs. Mm-hmm. And I also have to feel guilty that I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
So that is a trick in writing, and especially in marketing, is never put something in front of someone that they have to feel like guilty about not wanting to read.
Yeah.
Because you've lost them at that point. So you want,
Steve, I saw your comment. This was from December of 2020. You said 1999 called.
oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, I probably put this out and it just resurfaced or something. All right, so this is Raisin Bread by Marketer Hire, which is not, it's like their business newsletter that gets sponsored for some reason. So that's really cool for them, right? Because they're kind of working it both ways.
Yeah.
But this is not like someone from their staff, but this is me saying, hey, this would be a great idea, is to put in a Q&A with a different person on your team as a way for people to get to know them, if that fits your brand story. If their story told this way, like something they did that's helpful to your audience, conveys a lot better than this.
Yeah. Oh, that's so smart. That's so smart.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's so smart. Because then, especially if you have a client-facing person on your team, where you want people to like get to know them on a more relational level. Yeah, instead of doing their CV, just ask them a few questions. Like when I worked at Benzel, I had a couple guys in the welding space. I had a ton of guys who were just awesome to interview because they had such great stories and such great backgrounds. But if you read their CV, you would just think they went to Ferris State for welding school and then they worked for this robotics company, this automotive company. Now they work for us. And it's like, no, man, they did way cooler stuff than that. Like they were doing stuff they were like building robots in their science fair in high school and stuff like that. Like that stuff is interesting.
Like 5 questions with
that stuff's way
whoever.
more than their CV.
Brilliant. Exactly. Yes. So I think essentially the why not is because it's not as interesting to them as it is to your team. And your team probably didn't even read the whole thing. Like, let's be honest. The why is because people like working with humans. So you want to do everything in your newsletter that you can do to humanize it, which would include videos, Q&As, personal introductions, or like better than these stiff corporate announcements. And if you have the urge to send out a newsletter that has those bios in it, save it for the internal newsletter. Let the comms team guy handle that on the inside. Like, because basically what this one did is probably ripped off from whatever they sent out to the team.
Yeah.
Like, hey, these new people are hired. Like they just were like, oh, we could put that in our newsletter. That'll fill it up.
Or they took the press release copy and basically just slapped it in the newsletter. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so this is our last one, I think, that has an image, and then we will kind of speed through the rest because I am like competitive and I want to be like right on time.
All right.
So, and you tell me, you want me to like, okay, never mind.
Rip and run, do it.
We're going to be as long as I go. All right. So this is a quick one. Don't make it a product catalog. I think Matt mentioned in the intro for this that it was important not to just make it an extension of your product catalog. This is not a brand newsletter. This is a magazine, right? But this is what you want to kind of go for, which is, yes, there is some stuff like how Morning Brew would be. There is some stuff you could buy, but it's a balance and it's mostly stuff you should want to engage with, right? So you have to think of yourself. I actually think this has a few too many ads.
You do.
But you want to think of yourself. I feel like I do it better, but I don't like to brag on myself. But here we go. My approach is I do all of this to earn rapport and build my personality with people. We've got a video every week, and then we've got some categories that people enjoy. And then I tuck into this section, which could be its own product weekly newsletter, a little bit about Curated. And I remind people this newsletter is published using Curated. Like, I don't ask them to go buy. I just give them a clear path. They know they can go find Curated and get this done. So give them a path to purchase, which is just your brand is associated with this great thing you're sending them, not this pressurized, here are things I want you to buy. And so that I think it's important to mention right now that I've worked at places before that didn't really know how to measure the ROI of a newsletter because it falls in the email category. So they assume, oh, well, we should see revenue influenced, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that if you're doing an editorial newsletter, your intention is not call to action to buy.
Right.
Your intention is engage, and engagement is measured in people respond directly. When you start being more human in your newsletter, people respond directly. Thank you so much for this advice. Like that is deepening that relationship. That is worth 5 clicks to a blog. You know, like that's a person appreciating what you've done for them. And it's depth of reading, like it's open rate. It's not, oh, well, our e-blasts are performing better than our newsletters because we see more revenue influenced by the e-blast. But the e-blast will produce even more revenue if the newsletter is its sidekick.
Right.
Right.
If it's used to basically augment that effort, because essentially when they get that ask, you know, it's just like it's like the jab hook from Gary Vee. Like you makes a deposit, and then boom, you ask for the withdrawal. And the effect of it is much better because they've been providing them value for a prolonged period of time without asking for anything in return. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So don't be impersonal or overly corporate. We've hit on this a bit. Do write like you talk. And a key to this is using the word you, which I got a little funny with this. And I said, hey, you incredible engineer. But the reasons why are because you can either be stiff and appear fake and formal, and it actually does the opposite of what you want. It adds distance. Or you can be intimate and improve clarity. And people want to read something. An email is something a friend sends you, right? Mm-hmm. Be their friend. Don't be rigid and boring. Do test new creative ideas. People talk all the time about how it's great to test on social. It's great to test on LinkedIn too. People like to be surprised. You can add in a new section. You can keep what works and ditch what doesn't. It's a newsletter. No one's going to like call you out because you suddenly have a new first section, especially if you do what we talked about before, which is bring them along for the journey. Hey, we're trying this new thing. Can you let us know what you think? And it teaches people to expect interesting. I'm trying to see. You might want to do some things like videos and serial content, which this is one of my favorite ideas that people who do really good newsletters, especially dailies, can achieve this. But you could do this with a weekly, which is to tell a story in pieces. So you might have, like, if you think of a listicle type blog, like 5 ways to do this or whatever, expand that across 5 newsletters and give one way in each newsletter that then prompts the opening of the next one, because they're following in a Netflix binge type mentality what you are delivering to them.
Sure. That makes your whole newsletter basically episodic in nature, which is awesome. Yes. That's something that we advocate for a lot at Gorilla. So that makes total sense. I will say on your point about using you all the time, that's just like with anything in any of your guys' copy, landing pages, email, newsletters, just anything of that nature, like your ads, like your, like use you and your as often as possible without it being like really forced, because it just builds intimacy so much better. It makes you much more empathetic to your target audience.
Agreed. All right. So number 8, don't optimize for desktop. Why? Because 42% of emails are opened on mobile. So it's the phone app that we don't delete. If you optimize for mobile first, you need to test other browsers. And the reason for this is because it gets wonky out there in the land of email browsers. And you want to try to open it in some major browsers like Gmail and Outlook and whatever else you think your audience might be using. Also, it might feel awkward to write 1 and 2 paragraph sentences, but when you read an email on mobile, 5-sentence paragraphs takes up the whole screen. Either way you hold it, and you have just told them, hey, welcome to my copy block. Do you want to try to see what I have in here? Because it's confusing.
Just go back to that wire wizard example. And that's all you need to
Yes.
do. Like, it's just a huge block of text. Like, yeah, absolutely. The other thing is, like, if you use an old like email editor, kind of like that example that we showed, text isn't going to be big enough on mobile. And so you're gonna have to squint and, like, enlarge the screen image so you can read. So
yeah, don't make the old people eyes strain. I got enough to worry about. All right. Last, number 9, don't create a burden for yourself or your team, but do work together, start small, and have fun. So that's where we get into that. What's the right cadence? What's the right thing to do? What should we be measuring? You may be reviving a newsletter that needs help and has its own expectations or staff expectations, like this has got to go out once a month, or you might be launching something new. But if you bring a team in around it and you make it fun, like pick content categories that are going to be fun, Q&As, videos, things that like you feel will resonate with your audience, then you will be more inspired to continue, because newsletters don't just explode overnight. They take time. So we didn't really build this around how to market your newsletter, because I'm going from like, you have a list, here's what you can do with it. The next step is marketing it to expand that list. But what you want to be sure of is that you are being niche enough to, when you expand, you're only expanding to more people who are good fits for your product, instead of, I want the world to read this. And having a smaller list can feel like a safe place to play before you start trying to take it to that level. But you want to build connections internally and externally. And I really advise splitting up different content sections with different people and working as a team to like fill in your spot of the newsletter for the next issue, and with a goal of understanding your target persona. So experiment, and keep it fun, because if it becomes a drag, then you're going to like miss a month and be like, it doesn't matter, kind of thing. But if you were building a relationship with someone, you wouldn't miss, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking like old timey. Like if you had a phone date set with somebody before the internet, like you would kind of miss that you missed that phone date once a month, or whatever you've got as your touch point and your check-in. So this is your email check-in that says, how are you doing? We've got great resources for you. We're always here to serve you.
For sure.
All right. And then you guys will find this. I'm just going to show you. There are some good examples in here of newsletters, newsletter tips and tools, and there's a bit about Curated if you're curious. Hit me with questions.
I got some questions. Dennis here's got a question. If you got questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to start with Dennis's question because I think it's pretty interesting. How is content about other customers received? So if you were to highlight like a welder spotlight of the week is customer Bob, how would you go about doing that? If you wanted to use that as part of your content curation process?
I think it's great because it's like if it's hitting your customer, it's like a reconfirmation that they have made a good choice because someone is being successful and is associated with this brand. It's also great as like these little mini case studies for prospects, right? If they see some success being had. So I ran some newsletters that had a lot of those that showed like, here's X who launched this last week and they're doing great with this. They get really good response. What you want to be careful of is not creating any conflict if you have customers who feel like they deserve that highlight as well. So always welcoming people to submit something or share their news with you. It's actually a great way to encourage that and get more case studies for your company.
If you have like micro influencers as well that you use and you want to spotlight them in your newsletter, do the same thing that you did with your employees, like 5 questions real quick, just about them that, maybe you're a little bit outside of your business domain. because like if you're working with an influencer on Instagram, chances are your audience on email has no idea who that person is. I'm just going to make that connection because your audience is probably a little older on email who's reading your newsletter. So yes, I think using other customers is perfectly fine. You probably want to just slide it by and make sure they're cool with it. Chances are they're going to be. Just a quick email confirmation and you should be off. But
it's actually a wonderful way to like build rapport, right? If you know their story because you're following them and you say like, hey, we're going to include this. Can you give me a quote? Or use it to further your relationship with them. It actually further deepens that particular relationship while also helping others see what you do for your customers.
For sure. Any other questions, please drop them in the chat. I got a few here I want to ask you real quick. And so my one question actually that I really have on a newsletter, because I'm sure some people were thinking of this, like how long should you give your newsletter? Like how long until you know that this newsletter is successful and that, hey, we've reached a certain point here where we know this works? Like what is it's working feel like? And how long should you give that?
I feel like a good gauge is between 6 months and a year. It's kind of like content. There's a lag time, right? And you have to think of that in the way that it takes time to build a relationship, right? You don't immediately decide this is perfect within the first week of dating. Or if you do, you wonder if it really is, right? So in my experiences launching, that seems to be the good gauge of like, hey, we've tried a few things and we feel really good about like our open rates and our engagement and our content metrics. Like we're seeing what's happening and don't underestimate, like those numbers are fun to look at. But if you have 3 to 20 people emailing you on a weekly basis saying, this was great, this really helped me, like you're doing your job. So it's interesting to think of a newsletter as being like one of those tactics that can be like a customer support or success marketing, I would call that, as well as prospect marketing at the same time.
Cool. Yeah. And like the replies you get to me are always useful. Like if it's like something as simple as your headline or something like that, but still that got them to open it and read it. Like that's the kind of qualitative feedback that you can't measure, but you know you can take lessons from and apply to your future newsletters as points of emphasis or things to test.
Yes, there's a book I would recommend to everyone. It's called Love Ability. It is not a romance book. It is by Brian DeHoff, who is like the founder of AHA. And
a beverage company?
No, AHA software. It's like a product development.
Gotcha.
But great book. And he talks about the complete customer experience is what he calls it, or the complete product experience is what he calls it. So it's from first touch to long haul customer. And you measure it through things like love notes is one of the things he calls it. And that is when you hear directly from someone how much they love what you're doing. And you can measure your newsletter in love notes.
All right. Another question. I think this is a really important question to ask too. So I'm going to bring this up. Do you think it's useful to face the objections, the objections of newsletters early? Like
yes.
people will like be like, damn it, not another newsletter, not another thing pumping product, not another company trying to get in my inbox once every couple of weeks. Like, do you think it's useful to face those objections head on or just try to let the quality speak for itself? And if you do face the objections, how do you do it?
Hey, like I'm all about bringing people along for the journey. And so if you've had a newsletter for a while and you're like overhauling it, then that's the moment to say like, hey, we don't think y'all love this. We're going to try to make it into something you do love. Because there's still like, if you're still getting like 20% open rate, like it's still worth reaching out to those 20% of people. If it's a brand new launch, then you've got to kind of make the case for why this is going to be helpful. And that is through I think Gorilla does this. Like that is through a really strong welcome email. Like I try in my welcome email to say like, hey, newsflash, this isn't going to like boost your growth overnight. Like here's what I cover in this newsletter. I'd love to know what's most important to you. I'd like to make sure that I'm serving you as a reader, and thank you for joining me for the ride, kind of thing. So setting expectations is probably my number one like bit of advice to someone launching is like, great, object if you will, but a segment of people are going to really get value out of this. So if they make you a VIP in their inbox, like basically everywhere you market, your goal is to stand out. Mm-hmm. So now you've got to stand out in the inbox and be the thing they do look forward to and that they do open.
I remember when I was at Gravy and when they did the first newsletter, the From Scratch newsletter, mm-hmm. We would just tell people flat out, like, if you think this newsletter sucks, tell us. Like, we want to know, because we'll make improvements. We will listen to you. And we just like really just so bluntly handle that objection. Like, if you think this stinks, let us know and we'll handle it. And if you still want to unsubscribe after that, you know what? We have no reason to convince you to stay. So I think it's being brutally honest about that is super useful. I think people would actually respect you a lot more for it.
Yeah. And I think there's something to not being discouraged to market directly to the people who are super delighted by you.
Yeah.
Right. That might be 30% of your audience is super delighted, but that 30% of your audience influences a sphere of people who might also be delighted with you. Absolutely. So their delight may be the marketing mechanism, word of mouth, that newsletter is worth.
I want to hold that because I just got a question from Whitney, which is kind of around that a little bit.
Okay.
So I want to bring this to your attention. So Whitney says, for newsletter signups, I try to make it easy to just ask for emails, but it's important to have names on your list as well. And then I want to also segment that to like, what are ways once you've, well, actually, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to that, but let's first handle just this first one, just regarding like, what information do you think is fair to ask for to get people's names on your email newsletter? Is it just
I am a like less friction better. I wish people could subscribe without giving their emails, but that's not possible, right? So you probably want to start with less, and then you could test adding more. But if adding more, like your business email or like certain things, when you fill out a form, indicate to me that you are trying to qualify me. And I go, like, why do they want to know how many people work at my company? Like, it's just a newsletter.
Yeah.
Right?
That's nice.
So I think you kind of have to ride the fence on, you might be serving a persona who's completely cool with filling out a long form. But just know that you're making it more difficult for them to just hop in and be exposed. So to me, like that's why my newsletter is available as a public, like you could go through and read every one of my published issues and browse the archives without ever subscribing, and then just go to that once a week, because my intention is to get the content out there and to have it be read. So I need your email address to send it to you, but I would prefer if I didn't have to ask for it, because I want you to want my content, not me to want your email address.
Right. Totally goes back to intent. Like, my intention is for you to read my newsletter, not for you to get in my email sequence. Like, I'm not trying to acquire your email address. I'm literally just doing it because it's the minimum piece of information that I need to give it to you in my inbox every week, every couple of weeks. I'll also say the same thing with your newsletter form, Wendy, that I would say for any form ever on your website. Ask for the absolute least amount of information that you possibly need to make the next execution happen. Like,
yes. And I will say
every form on your website.
Here's a form tip, which we digress, but that's what we do, right? I'm Southern, we meander. So I've seen on some websites a really smart thing with forms, especially if the form is a little longer, but even if it's a short form, which is a picture of the person who they're going to be hearing from. And it's like, hi, this is Ashley. hi, I'm Ashley. I'm the person behind this form. So that you immediately put I'm filling this form out to get information from this real person instead of this like robotic act of
think about it. What does that suggest? That suggests you're going to hear from a person immediately and not an automated email sequence. And it also just, it's another like breaking the barrier of, or breaking the fourth wall of like form submissions. It gives you a relational human aspect to your, to your conversion point, which is important, especially if you have, one or two dedicated people on your SDR team or someone like that. Like what's the downside of not doing that, right? I mean, it's just something to give people more peace of mind when they submit that they're not going to get put into some terrible automated sequence or thrown through like.
Gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, totally am about that. I think I have any other. Oh, I do have a question real quick about growing your list. So we've talked a lot about reading the newsletter. Let's say you've gotten us to the certain point, right? Like, okay, I have this list that I have to my current email subscribers. They like this newsletter. I want to go try to get more people now to register for this because there's other people in my total addressable market who could easily find value from this. What are just a couple things you would suggest for people to try to grow their subscriber list, whether that's organically or through any other?
Sure. So you don't want to forget the obvious stuff, right? So if you have a blog, your natural call to action after diving deep into a blog story can be, if you want more like this, check out our newsletter, subscribe, send them to the newsletter page, right? If you have a homepage of your website and a newsletter is one of the things that you're like most proud of, that gets you into deeper relationships with people, do not forget to have a newsletter, like a path to your newsletter in your navigation. Like some people completely forget to put it in their top navigation or even in their footer. And so like they're making it difficult to figure out that you have a newsletter. A newsletter is a great like MVP of like, what's this company like? Yeah. Because I can browse your website all I want, but I can also go be like, I'm just going to subscribe to their newsletter and see if they're up to snuff. Like, are they really doing this?
It's an MVP way to evaluate your company, period. Like if they're worth it, like I'll,
yes,
give them more. If they're not, I won't, for sure.
Yes. And then additionally, you can go beyond that. If you have, if you know of social groups like organic Facebook, some LinkedIn groups, possibly, that allow you to share that type of content, like make sure you read the group's rules and you know what they're allowing you to share. Then you can kind of promote. I would go about it the way we might on LinkedIn, which is to take a story out of that newsletter and use that as the organic post. Yeah. And then follow that with like a link to more like this or to subscribe in the first comment. I get a lot of subscriptions that way. There are newsletter directories that you can go and get listed on. There's a new company that just, because there are like 15 of them and each one of them is upload your picture, upload your URL. Like it'll take you like an hour and a half or something. But there's some company that apparently will do it for you on all of them. I don't know whether we can trust it to be perfect because once you start feeding something out, it becomes more complex. Sure. And then additionally, you can, in terms of Facebook advertisement, if your newsletter, if you can target your persona pretty well on Facebook, then you can usually get subscribers for fairly cheap through Facebook. And the best way with that is to have like a really compelling ad and a native sign up so that they cannot have to leave Facebook. And so it's basically paying a couple of bucks or whatever your industry's going rate is for appearing in front of that audience, for someone to like say like, oh, that looks interesting, I'll see if it's any good, kind of thing. So, but those tend to be less engaged members of your audience. Yeah. Right. So I would find the honey holes where your audience is and continually produce content in those places that you're just repurposing from your newsletter or your blog, and make them aware that you have a newsletter where they can not miss this. I've seen someone on LinkedIn who was like, hey, do you love all my posts? Because he uses like branded graphics with each one. I put out a newsletter that includes all of these posts weekly or monthly or something, if you want to make sure not to miss them.
Yeah, I was thinking,
Great way.
yeah. Like another thing you could do is if you have a charismatic CEO or someone like that who has a following, like they should be your biggest champion for newsletter subscription signups. We did that a lot at Gravy, obviously. Casey did it. Like Joe does that as well. Gorilla.
And then you can use a referral program.
Yeah, you can use a referral program. I mean,
if it makes sense. Like
yeah.
The trick with referral programs is to make sure like the stickers or whatever they get is not like that it's worth the person they're referring. Right.
If you have a couple people though who like are in certain groups or they're on LinkedIn or they have networking capability, ask them like, hey man, do you mind like doing this for me? Like just doing this for my newsletter. If I get a couple signups, I'll give you like, I'll buy you lunch or I'll give you like a DoorDash gift card or something like that. If you want to do that just to be nice, I think that is a pretty decent strategy to use as well to try to build your subscriber sign up list. Because if they like your newsletter, they'll do it probably with an expectation of nothing in return, but you can obviously give them something to deepen further that relationship with them. So I like the idea of doing things like that too.
I will share something that has worked well for me. And that is I curate and I follow influential people in the newsletter industry. And so when they publish something interesting, I curate it to my newsletter because my readers will get value out of it. When I curate something that someone influential has posted, I find them on LinkedIn or through email or however I can, and I send them, and this is my first touch with that person. I send them a DM or an email that says, hi, I really enjoyed your piece about XYZ. I'm including it in my upcoming issue of Opt-in Weekly. I link to the website where Opt-in Weekly lives, and then I say, I'd love to connect here if you're game, or like I customize it to whatever platform we're on. If it's LinkedIn, I'd love to connect. But if it's an email, like just thank you for publishing this, my audience will find it super valuable. Those lead to meaningful relationships with people who influence my target persona.
That's really smart. And I was gonna say, that's another point I didn't even think of is if you curate content and you have people that you're featuring, reach out to them and just say, hey, I'm featuring you here. Just thank you so much, by the way, for writing such a good article. And my readers will find
ask. There's no CTA.
They'll probably do it themselves. Yeah. They'll go, look, man, this company thought my thing was so dang good that they put it in their newsletter. Check it out here. Like, it's such a, to them, it's the ultimate social proof that what they did was good. So all I have to do is just flatter people with, obviously you find a use for your audience, but if you flatter them, they're gonna reciprocate that for you anyway.
It starts the relationship off on a very nice footing, right? Yep. Because then later, if I want to follow up with them because I'm interested in interviewing them or because I have an opportunity that we could work on together, or I want to make sure that they know about a new feature release that my product has, I can do it without feeling like I've unevened the balance. Like I've already given.
Yeah.
In a great organic way.
For sure. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions and I don't have any more. And I promised people we'd be shorter and we still went an hour, 15 minutes. So I feel bad.
Were we supposed to go an hour? Were we supposed to go?
It goes as long as it goes, but I appreciate you guys so much for the time that you guys.
Yes. Thank you everyone.
Every 2-3 weeks here. Actually tell everyone real quick how they can get in touch with you, by the way, before we depart here.
Okay, so you can find me on LinkedIn as Ashley Gattuso. That's a great way. I'm Ashley at simplefocus.com. And then when Matt sends this recording out, there will be a link to that Notion page if you want to go click on things there. I highly encourage you to go explore that because there's checklists and there's reconfirmations of the things you like instinctually want to do that you know you shouldn't, and you can go back and find the reason you shouldn't.
For sure. Look, as always, guys, we will give you the recording. We'll give you the Notion link instead of the slide deck. Same thing, though.
I do not work for Notion.
I know. And we'll see you guys for the next webinar. I actually don't have a topic right now, so I'm not even going to tell you what the topic is. Ooh. But when we have it, because I got a couple of things I'm working on, and I think I'm going to have something break through here in the next couple of weeks. So when we have it, I'll have it out to you guys. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate your time. Hope you guys got good info out of this. And y'all crush it this week, okay? It's only Monday. You have 4 more days of this to go. So go work on that newsletter, get it out to your people, and please write like a human, all right? Thank you all.